It's very common to finish reading a journal article or book chapter and find yourself thinking, that was interesting, but not being very sure otherwise how you respond to it. If somebody asked you what that text was about, you could probably tell them. But if they asked you what you thought of it, you might not be so confident in how to respond. And that can be a sign that you're not reading critically. It often happens because you're reading for information, to broaden your knowledge and deepen your understanding of a particular topic. The text is interesting to you because it's telling you things that you didn't know, maybe even things that you didn't realise that you didn't know. And reading from a position of not knowing something makes you feel at a disadvantage, like you're dependent and reliant on the researchers who wrote that text to tell you what's important and what you need to know. And that means that you get sucked into their agenda rather than being able to keep a critical distance and come to your own judgments. Academic writing is designed to be persuasive. It constructs arguments which it justifies at great length with evidence and reasoning. Of course, the researchers think that their research is the most important thing that you could be reading on the topic. They would, they wrote it. But this can make you lose sight of your own research agenda and lose that critical distance where you can come to your own decisions about what you're reading.
Critical reading isn't about being critical just for the sake of it, about criticising everything. It's just about carefully examining the quality of the sources you're using to build your own answer or your own solution. It's about moving beyond knowledge and understanding into the higher levels of thinking, application, analysis, evaluation, and synthesis. It's about asking what you might use this text for, about taking its argument and evidence apart and asking not just how did they do that research, but how well did they do it. And it's about using their conclusions, with the appropriate skepticism of course, as a building block in your own argument. Remember that academic writing is about making an answer, not finding an answer. You need to assess each text that you use in your work in terms of its quality and suitability. If the evidence you're building on is limited in terms of validity, reliability, or applicability, then it'll undermine your own work. Equally, if you critique a piece of research and find that it's perfectly valid, then it strengthens your own work.
The first step in reading critically is to be very clear about your own agenda. Bear in mind that essay question, that assignment task, or that research problem that you're working on. What is it that you need from the text that you're reading to help you to address that? How is it relevant to you, and how is it going to help you to achieve your goals? That's your agenda. And it helps you to make the most critical decision of all. Do I even need to read this? How much attention do I need to give it? You don't have to perform a full in-depth critical analysis of each text that you read, only to the extent that your own work rests on it. And you might decide that you don't need to read it at all.
Critical reading is about having a dialogue with the text you're reading. Imagine, instead of reading, you're actually having a conversation with the researchers and asking them questions about their research. Asking questions is at the heart of criticality. The questions you're asking are at those higher levels of thinking that we discussed earlier: application, analysis, evaluation, and synthesis. It sounds pretty complex, but these questions can also be very simple. So simple that a 3-year-old child could ask them. But they're also very powerful. And if you read with these questions in mind, you'll develop a critical reading habit very quickly. Remember, if there's something you don't understand, it might not be you. It might be a flaw in the research that you're reading. You can take those questions and start to form a more strategic approach to interrogating a text, though. One set of questions you might ask when you first pick up that article, book, or report, before you even really start reading, to evaluate it in its context. You could ask, who are the authors and what's their background? When was the text published? How dated is it likely to be? Where was it published, and does that affect the applicability of its results to your studies? Why was it published? What's the purpose of that text? Is there likely to be any potential bias? Next, you might ask questions about the text in its own right, on its own terms, critiquing what's there and deciding how valid it is. You might ask questions such as, is the research question or aim clear? Does it make sense to you? How was that research carried out? Was the choice of method appropriate and applied well? Are the claims and findings accurate? Are they well evidenced, and do they argue them well? Are the conclusions reasonable? Are they significant and proportionate? If you really don't know how you respond to a particular text, the best approach is to compare it with other texts on the topic you're looking at. One text might critique another, in which case you can decide what you think of that. Or you might find that the two texts agree or disagree, in which case you've either got a weight of evidence building up on one side, or you've got a debate and can decide which side you're on. Then you might start to situate the text you're reading in the light of all the other things that you're reading, to see what else there is, what wider picture begins to emerge when you compare this text to others that you've read. Next, and this is the hardest thing to do, you might start to read between the lines and see what's not there. What are the authors not thought of? What have they left out, made assumptions about, been unaware of? Maybe they didn't go far enough, or they had their limitations. So thinking more creatively, can you see anything which the researchers should have thought of and didn't? Finally, bring your reading back to your own agenda. Make sure you keep your own sense of purpose and avoid getting sucked into the agenda of whatever you're reading by reminding yourself of what you need from this text and how you're going to use it, or how it influences what you're doing. So how's this text significant to you, and how might you use it? Has it changed your emerging understanding or your viewpoint? And what's your own position on the claims or arguments it presents? What about the next steps for you? Is there anything you'd like to follow up and explore further? The dialogue you're having with the article, book, or report you're reading also includes your responses to your own questions. Critical reading also means critical note-taking. You're making a record not just of the information that you're reading, what the text says, but also of your own response to that information, your own answers to those questions. You're leaving notes to your future self for when you come to writing all this up as your assignment.